Thank you. It's really a joy to be here. I'm going to go first. Um, so, uh, since this is an organization that really supports writers and the craft of the book, I want to start off by talking a little bit about, how did I figure out how to write 37 words? I mean, the history of Title IX is half a century and has a cast of millions. So, how did I fit all that information and so many good stories into a book that will keep you turning the page and keep your interest? And what I looked for and luckily found was three people whose lives intersected with Title IX for almost all of those 50 years. And I want to just give you a taste of a couple of them to start off the discussion, because through each of them, I tell the story of one important aspect of Title IX. The first one was Bernice Sandler, who is known as the godmother of Title IX. And, although tonight we're going to talk a lot about sports and athletics, Title IX started in employment. Women they wanted to get into graduate programs and they wanted jobs and were being excluded from both of those. So roll a clip of Bernice Sandler to show how her activism started. I think you have to share with sound.
Uh, I was
Yes.
teaching, a course or two all the time. I was getting my doctorate at
I think we're frozen.
No, I think she's starting again.
Yeah. Where am I? Apologies, I'm just having a little bit of technical difficulty on this end here.
Sherry, you want to come back to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Bernice Sandler basically earned a doctorate in education. There were 8 openings in her department at the University of Maryland, and she couldn't even get an interview. And I won't spoil the story, especially if we get to see the video clip. But when she finally figured out what was happening, she launched a movement that led to the first congressional hearings about sex discrimination in education and eventually led to Title IX. The second person I was hoping to show a video clip of, through her, I tell the story of sexual harassment and sexual assault. Let's try this again. Here's Sandler, I think.
I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to teach. I love to teach. I got into women's issues because I was teaching, a course or two all the time. I was getting my doctorate at Maryland in the School of Education. And I love teaching, and finally got my doctorate and was still teaching, and they had 7 openings and didn't even think of me at all. It wasn't even considered. And I really am a good dynamic teacher and so forth. So I went to one of the guys and I said, they didn't even think of me. I need to know why. And then he said, without skipping a beat, let's face it, Bunny, you come on too strong for a woman. And I went home and I cried. Yes, I never should have opened my mouth in graduate school. I used to, was an active participant in the class and so forth. And my then husband was really quite good on this issue, and he said, are there strong men in the department? And I remember weeping and saying yes, in tears. When he said, then it's not you, it's sex discrimination. And that had not occurred to me. And it took me a few weeks to put it together that something bad had happened and it was called sex discrimination.
So that's Sandler. And then the second video is a woman named Pamela Price, who currently right now, this year, is running for district attorney of Alameda County in the San Francisco Bay Area. But at the time, she was an undergraduate at Yale University. And she went to turn in a paper late. And the professor kept saying things like, I hope this is an A paper. So roll this clip and you'll see what happens with her.
he's dropping these clues and I'm totally oblivious. I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to see. That's great. I hope it's not a C either. But then he starts to repeat it. Well, I really, really would hate to give you a C. Okay, I don't want to see. I really, really, really would hate to give you a C. And I'm saying, I don't want to see, And finally he just says, well, will you make love to me? And again, I had no frame of reference. All I could think was no. No, I'm not. And so I remember just sitting there saying no. And, trying to process it in my own mind and just continue. All I could say was no. No, but not with any force, just really no. Probably by the time I got down to the bottom of the stairs, I'm thinking, I'm going to get a seat. I didn't sleep with him. I got angry. I got confused. I didn't know what to think.
So Pamela Price, just to cut the story short, she was in the first lawsuit under Title IX for sexual harassment and sexual assault. It was called Alexander v. Yale. And it's good that she joined that lawsuit because the first judge, although he did rule that Title IX can cover sexual harassment, he threw out all the other plaintiffs, which left Pamela Price. So you had the word of one young Black woman against a white male professor. I won't blow the ending to tell you how that ended, but read the book. But I just wanted to give you a taste of some of the amazing people. I got to interview close to 100 people, did a lot of research in the archives, and pieced together a story in what I hope is a human way that keeps turning the page. Lucy, you want to talk to us about your book?
Sure. My book is actually a novel for YA. It's called No Stopping Us Now. One of the things I love about Sherry's book is how it shows that there were thousands of girls and women doing this work in the early 70s. And my novel, No Stopping Us Now, is based on my own true story of one of those people who was doing that work in 74 and 75. It all started with I wanted to play basketball. I desperately wanted to play basketball, and there were no basketball teams at my high school. I did play tennis. I think the first event in the story, well, not in the book, but I lettered in tennis. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go to the Letterman's Club and join it. I knew it was only boys. And I went to the Letterman's Club, and there are all these boys and the male teacher advisor. And they, in front of me, had a whole discussion whether or not girls could be in this club, even though we had letters. I remember the main thing I remember is one boy saying, but it's called the Letterman's Club. What would we call it? Anyway, I left that meeting thinking nothing had changed. But shortly thereafter, I was called into the vice principal's office. And she told me that Gloria Steinem was coming to town and that she wanted a youth representative on the stage with her at this is in Portland, Oregon, at the Civic Auditorium. And do you want to be that person? I was terrified, but of course I said yes. I had heard lots and lots about Gloria Steinem, as we all had then. And that was an earth-shattering experience for me for many reasons. I learned about Title IX. I learned that I had a right. It was 1974 and Title IX had been passed 2 years earlier. I learned that I had a right to play on a basketball team. Maybe the bigger lesson was meeting Gloria Steinem and seeing how kind, calm, funny, completely rational she was, which was very different than how she'd been portrayed in the media. I got up the next morning and read the Portland Oregonian and was really stunned. I was a naive little 17-year-old, and I was stunned by how that reporter portrayed Gloria Steinem. It was as if she's a monster. This is a direct quote from that article about the 3,000 people who were in that audience. In attendance, this reporter wrote, were the usual lesbians, lunatics, and bra burners. Lunatics. So that radicalized me right there. I realized how afraid some people were of just rational, calm, equal rights. So I started testifying down in Salem, Oregon, to the legislature. I started testifying to the school board, and my education blew up at that point because there was so much blowback. Letters flew all around the city. Letters to the Oregonian about me, letters from the school board to my principal, from the principal to the school board. Pretty much everyone talked about what a liar I was. What I had said was there is no girls basketball team and there is a boys basketball team. So I, saying pretty factual stuff. I just wanted to share, I kept a scrapbook at the time. Here it is. It looks like a scrapbook that's 50 years old. And I wanted to share just a couple sentences from documents in that scrapbook. This is a letter from Bob McFarland. He was the athletic director at my high school, to my principal. He felt a little bit on the hook since he was head of the program. And he wrote about my testifying to the school board. Miss Bledsoe's statement that male athletes are sanctioned and privileged and given exclusive rights to official facilities is totally and unequivocally preposterous and unfounded. So they were pretty upset. This is one of my favorite quotes too. This is from the same guy, the athletic director, again to my principal. I like to show these documents, these 50-year-old documents. I sincerely believe that if Miss Bledsoe has any quarrel with the overall athletic program at Wilson High School, it should be directed more toward getting more girls involved, not toward getting the athletic department involved. The question there, of course, that I asked the school board next time I went and talked was, how can you possibly get girls involved in programs that don't exist? Finally, the last quote I'll share with you. This one, I love this one too. It's from the Public Information Department of the Portland Public Schools. That sounds a little Orwellian to me. The Public Information Department. Anyway, it's from the Public Information Director to the principal of my high school. Throughout this entire letter, he refers to me as the girl. And this is the final sentence. My last suggestion would be that you refute the girl and defend your high school at the next meeting. So there was a whole lot of refuting the girl. That was kind of upsetting to have all that happening, but it got quite a bit scarier when the personal attacks started happening. The boys basketball coach at my school literally pushed me against a dark hall when I was walking down the hall by myself and told me if I didn't shut up, I would be sorry. I had a very good friend on the boys basketball team, and he told them various disparaging things about me and asked them to spread those rumors. I had, at that time, I don't think the term sexual harassment was in use. I didn't share any of this even with my parents or friends or family. I just sort of thought that's what happened, I'm gonna stop there, but I tell this whole story in No Stopping Us Now, and I have novelized it because I wanted to bring in a few other stories that were happening. And today, I just want to mention that one of those stories is a young girl who needed an abortion. It certainly was the experience of several of my friends in high school, and I'm really glad I shared that story also in No Stopping Us Now.
Well, thanks, Lucy, and thanks, Sherry. Just can't say enough about both of you and the accomplishments that you have and all the work that you've been doing to just keep Title IX in the forefront. And so my name is Anuka Brown, and just, a little bit about my background when I think about, the fact that we're having this in this 50th year of Title IX, and the fact that, there's an all-out war on advancing women's rights and opportunities. And so it's more than necessary to keep this front and center. So I was a student athlete, played at the collegiate level, and I consider myself a Title IX baby. And I say that for, a couple of reasons. Prior to the 1972 legislation, the most popular sports for girls in high school were cheerleading and square dancing. And because of that, it was really, imagine, you think today with young girls, imagine going home and saying to mom, hey, I really want to play softball. And she's saying like, no, but you can square dance. So you just kind of think about the fact that Title IX has done such an incredible job of helping to level the playing field. We are so far from being there, but the benefits of Title IX, I really do consider myself a beneficiary of Title IX. And we know from a recent Ernst & Young study that 95% of women who have C-suite positions played in organized sport. We know the power of sport for women and the fact that it changes lives. And so, when I just think about the last 50 years and what it has done to me, it certainly has afforded me an opportunity to play at the collegiate level, play all over the world, and then go into a career in sport, one in which I was in most instances, the only woman at the highest levels, the only woman of color at the highest levels. And it was because of the leadership and the courage that I gained through my experience as a student athlete that I feel like I have excelled at my career. So I can't say that, I can't emphasize that enough. You know, there's a lot of narrative about Title IX that I think is so important that we really understand where the narrative is coming from. As a student athlete, we always heard that, you know, they're canceling men's sport programs because of women's sport programs. And so they pitted men against women. And the reality of that is, you know, if college presidents and athletic directors were doing it right and investing in women's sports, it's not about canceling men's sports, it's about investing in women's sports as was the original intent. And so because of that, they've chosen to cancel men's sports. And the answer is, don't cancel women's sports, don't cancel men's sports, invest in women. And the last point that I'll make is, you know, in this time that we're thinking, you know, more and more individuals and organizations are thinking about social justice. The vast majority of beneficiaries of Title IX have been white women. And that's because underserved communities don't receive equitable funding for sports. And because of that, girls of color, continue to be underserved and virtually ignored. And so we really have to address the funding gap and how that relates to not only high school sports, but it actually extends itself into college, right? Right now, there are 2% of head coaches and 2% of athletic directors are women of color, compared to 21% of head coaches and 19% of athletic directors being white women. And that's across all three divisions. And so there are clear data points that speak to the fact that this goes as far back as high school, right? The importance of, you need to see it to be it, but you need to get those opportunities. So I'll leave it there, a lot to unpack. I obviously talk about issues of sexual harassment and how that's dealt with on college campuses. And, you know, there's so much more to be said about the importance of true investment and equity at the collegiate level and beyond. Thanks.
Anuka, I want to build on that because it's so important what you said. One of the main take homes from my book is that, you know, most of the benefits of Title IX, which have been many since it was passed, most of them have gone to white women and cisgender women and affluent women. And, you know, the people who are more marginalized in any group are not benefiting as much from Title IX. And one of the things that I found that I didn't know is in the very beginning, Title IX, the original bill, was supposed to basically just amend Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and add the word sex to the prohibition against discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. And the Nixon administration and others threw up their hands and said, no, whoa, back up, that's way too much. But Polly Murray, the legal genius, and most of the women's advocates at these hearings, congressional hearings, advocated for unifying civil rights, because especially with intersectional discrimination, you can't separate a woman of color who's being harassed. Is she being harassed because of her color or her race? And we've ended up with different rules for different kinds of discrimination and everything. So it's such an important issue to address. And if we don't deal with that, Title IX will never fulfill its promise. I want to emphasize that Title IX is just a tool, right? I mean, it's social justice movements that brought it to us. The civil rights movement, the women's movement, the movement against sexual violence, the LGBTQ rights movement. Those movements are ongoing. And we can everyone here has a role to play in those movements. And Title IX is a tool that we can use and that we need to support. I want to ask Lucy, Anuka, you talked a little bit about what sports meant to you and your development as a professional. And Lucy, what about you? I mean, let me play devil's advocate. What's the big deal about sports? I mean, we as a society has decided that uh, athletics are an important part of education. But what did they mean to you?
They meant the world to me. And, I wasn't particularly good. I played in college, but I never started. But I loved having a sisterhood. I loved having a group of women with whom we striving for excellence. I mean, just that experience. I mean, making that connection that Anuka made between later in life, excelling at whatever you choose to do, and having that experience working with a team of women striving for excellence, trying to perfect your physical performance, which is completely tied to your mental performance. It's in basketball, you need both. One thing I've been thinking about a lot and trying to articulate, and haven't found the best way to articulate it yet, but right now seems like there's two streams how Title IX is being used. And one is with the sexual harassment and sexual assault, and then the other is about sports. But to me, they are intimately connected. And I think Anuka referred to this a bit. As an athlete playing on a team, I found my voice. That's how I found my voice. That's how I found the strength in myself to later speak up, to later be an activist, and probably to find better ways to deal with the sexual harassment that we all have dealt with than I did in high school, when I let that coach push me against the wall and didn't know how to even speak it. Once I had teams, I found my voice. So to me, it was just so much.
Yeah. And I have a question for Anuka too. In reading your biography before we started this program, you filed a major lawsuit over sexual harassment when you were working in professional basketball spheres. Did you face anything like that in college when you were a player, or what was your experience then?
No, I was always with a group of badass women. Nobody bothered us. And to Lucy's point, that was we traveled as a pack. We fed off each other. We are friends to this day. There's never a time where if I'm challenged, I can't call one of them. They've all gone on to do tremendous things. But I will tell you that the seeds of Title IX and the opportunities are what gave me the courage to stand tall, on top of the fact that, I come from a family of high achievers, and incredible amount of support. It was just the ability to stand tall during that time. Not everyone is equipped to do that. Not everyone is wired to be able to sustain that over time. If you were to chronicle what a woman experiences if she files a sexual harassment lawsuit, no one would ever do it. And I do attribute my ability and my strength. A lot of that came from my experience as an athlete, and really pressing through and persevering through. And then, just the importance of, when you learn leadership skills, you learn that it's important to stand tall, even if you have to stand alone. And in the context of sexual harassment, you look around you and you see 10 people that you think are going to support you. And when you get to court, there might be one person standing there. Everybody has run for the hills. And so having the wherewithal to stand tall is something that I learned through sport. And again, as a beneficiary of Title IX.
One question I have, a part of the answer came up. I was doing a little research, Anuka, and I read your interview in Essence. And one thing I've been trying to, and there's a bit of an answer to this there, but I've been trying to figure out since I was 17, and I feel like I know better now, but where that rage comes from in the opposition, the rage of the male coaches in my high school. I thought, I just thought, gosh, we're just talking about sharing a budget and sharing a little gym time. And there's this anger that comes up that's like kind of hard to understand. And you addressed that when you were talking about your sexual harassment lawsuit, and that it's not just the money, it's not just what they have to share materially. I think the word you used, it's about sharing power that was so incredibly difficult.
Oh yeah, and I would say, look what's happening today with women's rights, our right to control of our own bodies. It is our mere existence that is threatening. So,
It has nothing to do with
and-
life.
and
Nothing.
so when you think about, issues of, how dare you ask for more? You should be happy with the crumbs that you're getting. I always talk to women across collegiate athletics, and those that are demanding for change, to not settle for the crumbs. And we've so long settled for crumbs. And there's a lot to be said about, what is the saying? Well-behaved women never make progress or never make history. Who cares about making history? How about progress? How about speaking up? I always talk about this in the context of men coaching women. There's some fantastic coaches that have moved over and coach women because money started pouring into women's sports. And now you see a lot more male coaches. We have not seen the same reciprocation on the men's side. When are we going to see a woman coaching a men's collegiate level basketball team? Many of them, even the professional ranks, are hiring women coaches, and we have yet to see it at the collegiate level. I say that, but I also want to remind us all that coaching men doesn't mean we've made it. It's just about an equitable distribution or opportunity for women, right? As an athletic director, when you're hiring for a men's basketball coach, when you see a woman's resume, do you just pick it up and put it in the garbage, or are you giving it a look and consideration? And that's the most important piece. And kudos to the athletic director that has the courage to finally hire a woman to coach men.
Yeah, I think before Title IX was passed, something like 90% of coaches of women's teams were women. And then once it became clear that the opponents of Title IX were not going to get rid of it or weaken it or water it down, and the NCAA said, all right, well, we better take over women's sports, then men coaches started moving into those positions because there was some money flowing there. So we not only have to get equal consideration of women coaches to coach men's teams, we have to get equal consideration of women coaches to coach women's teams. And it doesn't even stop there. I want to roll the third 1 minute video that we have queued up, which is the woman in my book through whom I tell the story of athletics in Title IX. And she and others have filed lawsuits, but faced retaliation. And there's a form of retaliation you can't legislate against. Roll the clip and she'll talk about it.
If you file a lawsuit, you don't get hired again. So,
As you well know.
as I well know. And it was a little different for me because I was in my late 50s. But Lindy and Stacy, they lost their careers. Here's Beth Burns, an excellent coach. She can't get a job. She's one of the best coaches in the country. Tracy Greaves' mom, one of the best field hockey coaches in the country, can't get a job. North Carolina hired her as a volunteer assistant, got a volunteer assistant down there, but she can't get a job. So, Minnesota Duluth, Shannon Miller, she's not going to get another job. And these are all these people are young people, and they can't get jobs. Yeah. So what's the message? Shut up. Don't speak up. We'll fire you, and you'll never get another job. And certainly, if you sue us, you'll never get another job.
So all those women she mentioned did pretty much succeed in their lawsuits. But as she said, there's nothing that can force schools to hire you, So it's a tricky path to walk, seeking justice. And like you said, Anuka, if we did a list of what everyone faces in, the lawsuits to try and achieve some justice, so many people wouldn't do it. I want to toss in one other thing, since the Supreme Court is on our minds so much this week. Last week, they had another decision that's kind of flown a little under the radar that's really going to affect a lot of lawsuits, especially around sexual harassment and assault, but in all the other civil rights laws too. they basically said that you cannot win monetary damages for emotional stress, for emotional harm. And if you think about sexual harassment and assault, that's a lot of the harm. They're saying if you can't show us that you were monetarily damaged, you can't win a big judgment, a big monetary judgment. This was a case that dealt primarily with disability rights, but it applied to all the different laws that use the same 37 words as Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. You know, those same 37 words are in Title IX, in Section 504 for disability, in the Age Discrimination Act. They all now cannot win these financial awards, and it's going to take an act of Congress to fix that, probably. Anuka, when were you playing basketball in college? What years?
Oh, wow. You really want to know how old I am? So I graduated from
because you're a Title IX baby, and there's a.
So I'm a Title IX baby. I graduated from Northwestern in 85, and so in 81 when I started at Northwestern, it was the first year of they had just moved from AIAW to NCAA, and so we were really, you know, I reaped the benefits of Title IX, but we certainly were not equal in terms of the level of funding that came later on. But to your point with regards to monetary damages, to a lot of organizations, it's a stroke of the pen. But the reason why that is so damaging is because the threat of legal action and the resulting being held accountable by monetary damages is what causes organizations to change what they do. And so the dismantling of that is basically said, hey, you can fight us fight us, spend all your time, expenses for lawyers, but you're not getting anything. Good luck. And so they've basically fundamentally are saying to organizations that are guilty, you're not going to be held accountable because it's a slap on the wrist.
Right. And Lucy, having read your wonderful book, No Stopping Us Now, and in talking to you, it seems to me that the biggest harm was the betrayal, you know, and the emotional damage of being harassed as a girl who just wanted to play sports, and then betrayed by the institution and the people who were supposed to protect you and be on your side. Would you say that's fair to say?
Well, it is. And it's funny because, as I mentioned before, I didn't even talk about, I don't want to give away the story, but I did get teammates later. I didn't even talk about this with them. It just didn't, and in writing the book, I actually felt quite emotional. It was quite hard. I mean, it's been years, of course, it's been 50 years. So yeah, I was really surprised that I realized, you know, it's been kind of a joke that I'll tell at a party. Oh yeah, the men's basketball coach pushed me against the hall in a dark hall and threatened me. And I realized that wasn't funny. It wasn't a joke to this 17-year-old, but at the time I had no tools to deal with it. So absolutely. You know, I want to take this opportunity. For some reason, I just keep thinking I'm a big college basketball fan. And there are women who are fighting back and succeeding. And I want to mention Dawn Staley, who just won, not a lawsuit, but she got an incredible pay raise from South Carolina, and then went ahead and won the national championship this year. So women like her who are speaking out and winning somehow, are leading the way. They're lights for us, and there are success stories.
Absolutely, and there are success stories relative to women who can have fought these battles and gone on to do well. You know, I was told I was committing professional suicide when I file a sexual harassment lawsuit, and I've gone on to have an incredible career. Certainly, it didn't go without challenges, right? Because people kind of give you the side eye, like, what are we getting here? Is she litigious? Like, what is that? And, to that point, in the context of athletics, they're also, you carry with this, like, other men are going to think you're going to file sexual harassment against them. I'm like, listen, if you promise not to call me a B, a hoe, and an MF, if you promise to actually behave in the workplace, I think we'll be okay.
You're good. Yeah.
So, I think we'll actually, you shouldn't worry about anything. But I think you do carry with you this kind of stigma. But let me tell you, I will tell you, I carry what I did like a badge of honor, because there are so many women who are experiencing harassment at the hands of men daily in their jobs across industry, and don't have the wherewithal or the voice or the ability to fight it. And I think that, it takes, even if it's a few people standing up and saying, no, this has to stop. It does cause long-term trauma. I mean, that's not, as you talked about that experience, Lucy, it does, like, that being harassed in the workplace, the experience that I had has caused long-term trauma in my life. And that can't be ignored. There's no stroke of the pen, there's no check, there's no amount that can take away that trauma. So I can't even, I can only imagine if it had happened at an earlier age, a 17-year-old. And so I would say that, when we talk about Title IX, one of my biggest concerns is the non-compliance and the accountability, at least at the collegiate level, right? There's, it's very rare that OCR, is the Office of Civil Rights, is coming down on colleges that aren't doing the right thing. And so at one point, the NCAA was really monitoring it. It's no longer being monitored. It's not a requirement of being part of the membership of the NCAA. So you're seeing this kind of behind the scenes dismantling of Title IX for me. And I would say that my greatest concern is the idea that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I am not, I am not a specialist in Title IX. But I have always said that when you start to consider how you will pay student athletes, right? There's a lot of discussion about the payment of student athletes. And, what are the options for us to have the ability to do that, since, coaches are making millions upon millions of dollars, right? And schools are making millions of dollars on the backs of student athletes. Like, the idea of how you will pay student athletes, and the concern that I have that once you start paying them, they become employees of the university, right? Which no longer requires the university to have to adhere to Title IX requirements, right? So is this the behind the scenes dismantling of Title IX, right, happening before our eyes, right?
Well,
because once that happens, like, okay, a college can say, oh, I no longer want men's I no longer want all those Olympic sports. I'll just take men's and women's basketball and football. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. And one thing that I'm getting asked a lot as I'm doing events now with No Stopping Us Now is this, I don't want to use the word depression, but some of us, and, I'm a few years older than you, Anuka, and you don't want to state when you graduated, but in the 70s, we felt like we were riding this wave. We passed Title IX, we passed Roe v. Wade. We really felt like something was changing. And it never occurred to so many of us that it wasn't going to continue changing and get better and better. And we're having this very Handmaid's Tale backlash right now, and dealing with that emotionally. I think I don't know how to deal with that. And I think a lot of people don't know how do we keep fighting when we feel like we've lost so much of what we had gained earlier?
Well, part of it is to look at history and learn from that, because the reason I asked Anuka when you were in college was because we actually lost Title IX and all the other civil rights laws in education. They were decimated from 1984 to 1988. There was a Supreme Court case called Grove City College, which was about athletics, and it was filed by opponents of Title IX. And the Supreme Court ruled that Title IX would only apply to the very specific department that directly received federal funding. So that would exempt most of athletics. And let's say you were sexually assaulted in the economics building, which was not built with a grant from the federal government, instead of the English department building, which was built with federal funding, you could not get help for the first one, but only from the second one. It was insane. And so for 4 years, there was a lot of this depression, which was very common among feminists in the Reagan era anyway. And what they had to do was push Congress to pass the Civil Rights Restoration Act, because this affected race discrimination, affected sex discrimination, disability, age, all of that. And they did finally get them to pass it and override Reagan's veto. That probably is what has to happen now about that Supreme Court ruling last week. And what it took was this grand coalition of all of these different interest groups coming together and realizing, their joint interests. That's what we have to do. We have to have each other's backs and keep pushing and not give up, because in my book, 37 Words, I cover all of the backlashes, as well as the progress made, and we can learn from that and go forward.
And I would add, all of these are wake-up calls. Like, we have been a little bit too complacent, and we really need to mobilize and speak truth to power. I have tremendous faith in young people. They have mobilized some of the greatest movements in the history of mankind. And when you think about just what they've done relative to climate justice, racial justice, I really think that women's rights, the power of the student athletes to use their social platforms to ensure that there's continued equity and more equity. So I really believe, like, if anything, this is more incentivizing. I think it's lit a fire under women, and I hope people will, if they're upset, they'll vote. But I do agree. Just when you think about, like, wow, is The Handmaid sitting and playing out right in front of our eyes in so many different ways.
Well, if we have time before we go to Q&A, I'd like to show just one last 1-minute video of one of those young people who I find inspiring. This is one of the co-founders of End Rape on Campus, Andrea Pino Silva, and she talks about, the intersections of identity and discrimination. And it's young people like this in the last decade that have energized the battle under Title IX and against sexual assault and other problems. Go ahead and roll that.
So I grew up in Little Havana. I grew up in inner city Miami. I'm a generation and a half American, and my dad was born in Cuba. My mom was born in the U.S. To parents that came from Cuba before Castro. Because no one knew what to do with, a young Latina in inner city Miami who had opinions. I mean, I was very much, people often frame me as being pompous and thinking that I was too good, but really I just was so stifled and I felt so constrained. And it's not that my family wasn't great, because they are, and especially my grandparents were so wonderful and so nurturing of my intelligence and my passion, but no one around me knew what to do with me, ever. I'm actually very passionate about mentoring young women, in particular young Latinas, young queer women, mainly because I wish that I would have had someone like me growing up that would have told me that I'm not broken, your intelligence is not a vice. It doesn't mean that you think you're better than people, it's just who you are, right? I didn't really have anyone like that growing up that was anywhere near my age, so I am like that for other people.
Andrea and other young activists of the last decade make up a good chunk of the last portion of 37 Words. I find hope for them, hope in the future. Do we want to go to audience Q&A? Do we have any questions from people?
While our audience members are thinking of questions, I have one just to get things rolling here. One of the big issues with sports that's been in the news a lot lately is transgender athletes. And of course, it's a very divisive and controversial topic. How does that connect to Title IX, if it does?
Well, I can start by saying that I think there are relative questions given identity and how that equates to equity, right? Because we assess whether you are Title IX compliant based on the balance, right? And it's typically been the percentage of men student athletes to women student athletes, or number of men on campus to number of women on campus. And now you're seeing different types of identities. I think relative to transgender athletes, I think that, what is still outstanding is bringing forward the data, right? And so I don't really have the background to really speak to the issue, because there's an absence of data around this because the population is small. And until the data is there are a lot of arguments about transgender athletes that are obliterating the records of women, but there's no data that's been presented to say that this individual has a competitive advantage. We can all think about it, relative to someone who at one point identified as male, now identifying as a woman, and make assumptions. But without the presence of actual data, there's no argument either way. So I think that remains to be seen.
And I would add, again, looking at the history, Title IX, the history is not just history, it also pertains to current events. And, the current media coverage is focused on testosterone levels and things like that. And Anuka is totally right. We need data on who is winning and not winning, and people are starting to collect that, and need more data on, what advantages do testosterone give or not give in this sport or that sport. But if you look back in the 1970s, when they were first coming up with the regulations on, okay, well, what is fair for women and men in athletics? How do we say, do this and you'll be complying with Title IX? There was a big battle for years over the regulations, and different groups put out different ideas. Some of them said, just split the money down the middle, and then the men can do what they want with their money, the women can do what they want with theirs. That would have been one way to do it, but the men's group didn't really like that idea. They wanted more money and they got it. But the women's groups even were divided. They said, well, maybe it shouldn't be split as men and women anyway. Maybe certain sports should be based on size or weight or other qualifications, and men and women would compete at the same time. Or there's sort of the Olympic or sometimes swimming model, where men's and women's teams from different colleges compete together, and you pool their scores and you match those scores against the other college, and whoever has the best combined score wins that meet. There's different ways of looking at it, and women's advocates could not agree, and we ended up splitting it men's and women's, partly because the ACLU and now National Organization for Women, coming out of the civil rights movement, said, separate is never equal. We can't have separate. We need to figure out a way to have a different mode. But they were overridden by other groups who said, we can't figure out anything else right now. Let's just do this. So some of those same ideas may be coming back into play as we figure out, okay, how do we include, if athletics is important for education, how do we include transgender students or non-binary students or intersex students? History is alive.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, we have a question from Mary. How do we inspire women and men to think critically about these issues? I find it hard to get the young to really know the history and laws. So many have short attention spans, and it worries me. Any thoughts or ideas on how to inspire them to dig deep?
Who is this question for?
How about you, Lucy?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I thought there was a specific. I've been thinking about this a lot since I wrote a book. That was why I wrote this book. It took me years to figure out how I wanted to write this story. I published it as essays a few times. I even wrote it as a screenplay once. I wrote it as a stage play. I kept trying to figure it out, but I finally realized that I wanted to talk to young people, and I wanted to have conversations with the young people. So for a lot of my events that I'm doing with the book, in fact, I'm doing one tomorrow night with Tara Vanderveer and two teen activists, teen athlete activists. I want to share some intergenerational information. So for me, a lot of it is listening first. I've been thinking a lot about how young women have a very different approach to feminism and how they, even the word, how they approach it. So trying to listen a lot to young people, and yes, hopefully sharing my story from 50 years ago. Hopefully that bridges our stories, just looking for how we can bridge. But I think it starts usually with the older generation listening more than we think we can. Just keep listening.
I like, no, go ahead, Anuka, you go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sherry.
Well, mine is short. I just like to reframe it as thinking about fairness. You know, kids understand fairness. You know, if you got to drink from this drinking fountain, but your friend didn't, that's not fair, right? Well, they get fairness in play and sports and things, and so do adults. So that's an easy way to dig into it.
Well, one of the things that I've always said about, you know, when you don't know your history, you have no foundation. And I really do think it's incumbent upon teachers and coaches and parents to educate their young people on the history of the sport, on history of how we got here. Just as we're trying to ensure that that the history of slavery in this country is actually something we talk about to young people, as that's being dismantled in states across the United States. But you think about just like when you don't really understand how you got here, it's very easy to dismiss how important Title IX is. So while I do believe it's definitely so important for us to listen to young people are going to make this happen. But without any context, we have to teach them. We have to take the time to teach them. I would love to see, you know, for every program, whether it's collegiate program or high school program, that before young people are allowed to play, they understand the history of sport. Whether it's, you know, lacrosse, you know, the sport was started by the Native Americans. It was started as a way to fight, to settle arguments. And, you know, most people that play lacrosse, primarily, you know, I think 2% of lacrosse, women's lacrosse players are women of color. But a lot of kids don't even understand the history of lacrosse. You know, same with basketball, same with all these sports. So I do think, you know, history, understanding Title IX is important, and we as elders need to teach that.
I've got one more question and then we'll wrap things up. This one is from Ruth. So much of what weighs in the balance is a policy agenda. What do each of you think are the most important policy agenda opportunities right now related to Title IX?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to go first?
Well, I would start by saying at the collegiate level, addressing issues of noncompliance. You know, we talked about just, you know, when there is a when there is a cost to noncompliance, people wake up, people stand at attention. Right now, it's, you know, there are rarely consequences for noncompliance. So I think that's really important to tighten that piece up. I'm sorry. I also think that this idea of holding people accountable, holding our policymakers, holding our representatives accountable at the state level. You know, I talked earlier about you know, federal funding and how states don't necessarily allocate funding equitably, which is why underserved communities rarely get funding for athletic programs or get such a small amount. But holding our policymakers, holding our representatives and our state at the state level accountable is really important.
Yeah, I think the forthcoming proposed regulations from the Office for Civil Rights under Biden, which will reverse some of the damage done with the regulations from former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, is an important policy achievement. It's still going to take time. You know, President Trump and Betsy DeVos were the first people in 40 some years to officially change the Title IX regulations. Before that, it was always, you know, guidance from OCR and dear colleague letters, which could change, you know, with the change of the White House and whether the administration, the executive branch sets that. But to change the actual regulations is a long process and takes years. So the Biden administration is at that. I think I'm hopeful that at some point we'll get to an agreement, a policy agreement, permanent policy agreement on, what do you have to do to deal with sexual harassment and assault under Title IX? And then anyone who doesn't do that, it will be seen as deliberately violating Title IX. That's the way it is in sports right now, according to the Supreme Court in 1992. But we as a society haven't quite agreed yet on all that. So it's a policy question, but it's a long-term evolution,
All right. Well, let's wrap it up with some thoughts on how to move forward from here from each of you.
I'll start. I think there's three things I can think of. One is, I think it was Sherry mentioned joint coalitions. And I think sometimes progressive people have trouble forming coalitions. And we absolutely have to form coalitions at this point, come together for some common goals and find ways to do that. One way to do that is to look for allies. And that can be on a small level or a big level. I know when I was a kid, the most unusual, the person I thought would be the least likely to be my ally in high school came forward and became an ally. And that was enormously helpful. So actively looking for allies, actively making joint coalitions, which might mean compromising some of our fine points. And then I can't say enough about how important voting is. And finding, if everybody could commit to finding 5 non-voters somewhere in their life and convincing them to vote, we, as in progressive people who care about fairness and care about racial and gender justice, are the vast majority in this country. If we voted, we could get everything. I work for an organization called Vote Forward that writes letters to likely Democratic voters. Sign up for that, voteforward.org, or find some way to turn out the vote so that we can keep the House and the Senate in the midterms. I think the entire democracy rides on that.
Well, I'm going to give my to-do suggestion in a very specific realm, since I'm on this panel with 2 amazing athletes. I would say that, especially in athletics, but especially in high school, each one of us has to take the initiative. I mean, I recently moved from San Francisco to a small town called Lebanon, New Hampshire. And as Anuka pointed out earlier, so many places are not even doing the basic things to comply with Title IX. And the most basic thing was every school and district is supposed to have a Title IX coordinator and their contact info prominently displayed. So out of curiosity, I looked up one of the local school districts to find their Title IX coordinator, and I could not find that information. And I'm a journalist, so I kept digging and digging, and eventually I found it. But if you're a 10th grader or you're a parent, you don't have time to find that. So each one of us has to pay attention. In high school, unlike in college, we don't have anything that makes it easy for a parent or a student to find out whether they're complying in athletics with Title IX. On the college level, we have something called the Equity and Athletics Disclosure Act, EADA. And every college has to post every year how many players are on men's teams and women's teams and how much should they pay the coaches and blah, blah, blah. And we can compare that easily. We have nothing like that in high school. Congress has consistently failed to pass that. So there's a big policy issue that each one of us could have a voice in and get to pass. And it starts locally. Look at what's happening in your school and speak up.
I would also bring this home by saying, perhaps, each of us can really create some leaning in on issues that are happening locally in our communities, and bringing along, 10 young women, teaching them, taking the time, just setting up a lean in circle and really teaching them about what Title IX means and why it's so important, and how they can address issues in their own schools. Most importantly, I think what we're seeing transpire across the United States is this complete dismantling of women's rights. And so it is so important that women rise up in any way they can, and have voice around these issues and vote, and bring others along. Oh, just a quick shout out. I see Diane is on the call. I just want to highlight that she's so amazing, and just you know, we went through our fight at the same time, and she is just an incredible woman. I appreciate the video and the input that she had on this issue.
Sherry, Lucy, Anuka, thank you so much, all three of you, for being with us tonight. And for those of you who joined us, thank you for joining us. No Stopping Us Now, and 37 Words of the books. Please share them with the people in your lives. And I hope we all take some advice from one of these actions. And sorry, Kat likes to say hi at the end of the event. And thank you all so much for joining us. Good night.